that is me. And you can see I've had no work done from that photo, that's for sure. Usually it's smaller, but hey, I'm good with that. This is where to reach me. I brought some cards, not as many as I should have remembered to, but I'll remind you at the end, thischairrocks.com is my main website. You can find all the things from it. And I'm the only Ashton Applewhite, I think. So if you can't find me, you're not trying hard enough, because it's pretty easy. So I'm going to start with where it hurts. How does that word make you feel? I used to feel the same way. What was my darkest fear? Ending up in some grim institutional hallway. And then I learned that the percentage of Americans over 65 in nursing homes, not all senior living, but nursing homes, is 2.5%, and it's dropping. Even for people 85 and up, the number is only 9%. What else was I worried about? Dementia. If you subtract that 2.5% of people living in nursing homes, 90% of the remainder are cognitively fit. Alzheimer's is a terrible disease, but it is not typical of aging. Sometimes I think I'm in the both sides of the story business. You will not hear me saying that the scary stuff isn't real or trying to brush it under the rug, but our fears are out of proportion to reality. How many of you know that Alzheimer's rates are declining? And that the odds of anyone in this room getting Alzheimer's have gotten lower and lower, and that people are being diagnosed at later ages. There are more cases because old age is the biggest risk factor, and there are more older people in the population. But the odds of any of us getting it are dropping. The real epidemic is anxiety over memory loss. Another reason that word scared me is that I assumed that old people were depressed because they were old and they were going to die soon. And then I learned about the U-curve of happiness, that people, generally speaking, are happiest at the beginnings and the ends of our lives. And this curve, I know my mother-in-law never believed it. She's like, but and happiness is hard to measure. I mean, I am scrupulously honest about my sources, but this curve obtains across cultures, across marital status, across socioeconomic status. And it is a function of the way aging itself affects the healthy brain. So I started feeling a lot better about getting older, and I started obsessing about why so few people know these things. These are not hard facts to find. Why are we so afraid of aging? The basic reason, the simplified reason, is because of ageism. That is the dictionary definition. We experience ageism anytime someone assumes we're too old for something, air quotes around that. It's never about age. There'll be a Q&A and a conversation with Donna Fedus, who's right here, so we can talk about all these things. Anytime someone assumes we're too old for something, a relationship, a haircut, a job, whatever, or too young. Ageism cuts both ways, and young people experience a lot of it too. It's any judgment on the basis of age. Prejudice is not about biology. It's about power. All forms of bias, ageism, sexism, racism, are socially constructed ideas, which everyone, since we're at Yale, knows is a fancy way of saying we make them up. And that means we can unmake them. And those ideas change over time, and they serve a social and economic purpose. Prejudice is not about who we are. It's about how we see ourselves, how others perceive us, and about how people in power, right, people who benefit from the existing systems, assign meaning to those perceptions, how they see us and how we see ourselves. Stereotyping underlies all prejudice, this assumption that all members of a group are the same, which is obviously never the case, but especially when it comes to age, because the longer we live, the more different from one another we become. Heterogeneity, diversity, is the defining characteristic of late life. I'm going to make a t-shirt that says that, if I can figure out a sexier way to say it. Pitting young against old, like pitting groups of low-wage workers against each other, or stay-at-home moms against moms in the paid workforce, is a time-honored tactic, divide and conquer, right, that distracts and divides us so we're less likely to organize to change the status quo. This us or them logic always pops up around healthcare rationing, right? Why should we pay for old people who are going to die soon? They don't say that part out loud. When we could allocate that money to kids. And I suggest we just reject that whole line of thinking. It is not ethical or legal to allocate resources by race or by sex and it is unacceptable to do so by age, period. The bad news, we're all ageist. Nobody is born that way, but attitudes start to form in early childhood, around the same time that attitudes about race and gender start to form. And in this culture, we are barraged by negative messages about late life from childhood on, starting with children's books and Disney movies. Wrinkles are ugly. Old people are incompetent. It's sad to be old. It's tragic to encounter any kind of impairment. And we older people can be the most ageist of all. That was like really a hard thing to get my head around in the beginning, because we've had a lifetime of absorbing these messages, and most of us have never thought to question them, right? No judgment. But unless we stop to challenge the underlying message, which is, I still wrinkle up my face when I say this out loud, that to age is to lose value as a human being. It becomes part of our identity, and that is internalized by us. I had to acknowledge my own prejudices and stop colluding. And what was the hardest prejudice to let go of? The one against myself, my own future older self. This is not my own original idea. It's an idea that everyone who thinks about ageism comes at, because all prejudice requires an other sports team, other religion, other nationality. And in ageism, because older people experience much more of it than younger people because we're so youth obsessed, that other is our own older selves, our own future selves. And ageism feeds on denial, our reluctance to admit that we are probably going to get old, right? We might even be old. I'm old. But it took me a long time to be able to say that, and it's hard, and I think what I say more often is older, you know. If there's more road behind you than ahead, you're not young anymore, so it's time to kind of work your way into that idea. If you can't, and no judgment if you can't, we all need to do this stuff in our own way. But it is denial when we try to pass for younger, or believe what it says on all those anti-aging bottles that line the walls at Sephora, or get offended when someone politely offers us a seat on the bus. And this age denial blinds us to our own bias, and it perpetuates it in so many ways. It is not being women that makes life harder for women. It's sexism. It's not living a man that makes life harder for gay guys. It's homophobia. And it is not the passage of time that makes getting older in this culture so much harder than it has to be. It is ageism. And when labels are hard to read, or we can't open the damn jar, we tend to think, what's wrong with me? I should be stronger. I should be better prepared. If there's no railings, maybe I should stay home. We tend to blame ourselves instead of blaming the ageism that makes those natural transitions shameful, and the discrimination that makes those barriers acceptable. There should be railings, right? I can't tell you how many places there are no railings. And when we dye our hair just to cover the gray, or conceal our age, or leave early accomplishments off our resume, we reinforce age shame. Now, let me say, those are really successful strategies, and no judgment whatsoever against anyone who does any or all of those things. But those behaviors aren't good for us because they're rooted in something that shouldn't be shameful. And from a structural point of view, they give a pass to the discrimination that makes them so damn useful. And for people who face other kinds of discrimination, like queer people and people of color, the costs are even higher. Aging is not a problem to be fixed or a disease to be cured. It is a powerful, lifelong process that unites us all, right? It's not something sad that old people do. It's something we embark on the minute we're born. I mean, and I have to say, it just gets more interesting all the time the more I learn, because it touches on every aspect of being human. I mean, if you told me 15 years ago I'd be fascinated by aging, I would have said, ew, it's going to be sad. And it's, I swear, just the opposite. But I'm not trying to pitch you on getting a gerontology degree, although I'm pitching you on trying to think a little differently. Now, you can't make money off satisfaction. But shame and fear create markets. Capitalism always needs new markets. Who says wrinkles are ugly? The multi-billion-dollar anti-aging piece of the global cosmetics industry. Who says low T, testosterone, right, or mild cognitive impairment are medical conditions? The trillion-dollar pharmaceutical industry. And what a market, right? Because sooner or later, everyone's going to come down with some piece of it. And imagine if we could cure it. The more clearly we see these forces at work, right, to zoom out. One of the most helpful things someone told me early on, he said, think where these messages, these negative messages, these messages that pathologize and stigmatize, think where they come from and whose interests they serve. And the more clearly we see those forces at work, the easier it is to envision alternative, more positive, and more accurate narratives. This is not happy think, right? This is what the data show. And the longer we wait, the more damage they do to our place, ourselves, our sense of self, and our place in the world. And I'm going to give some examples of how it plays out. We all know that longer lives require working longer and saving more, and yet age discrimination in the workplace is rampant. According to AARP, 4 out of 5 Americans say they've seen or directly experienced it, and it also makes it harder for young people to get started in the job market. It takes older workers longer to find jobs than older ones. It's much harder if you're out of a job for 6 months, which is often the kiss of death. It's harder, and if you get an interview, it's often over the minute you turn on your camera or walk in the room. My sister, who is 5 years younger than I am, so she will be 67 on Tuesday, and I'll be 72 on Thursday. She got a nurse, she's moving to Cleveland, and the one job she landed, she said the woman's camera wasn't working. So, this is true for white men. Ageism is often the first form of discrimination that they encounter. And the barriers are harder for white women and even harder to surmount for everyone else. And I know I don't need to tell you that the personal and the professional and the economic consequences are devastating, even though not one negative stereotype about older workers holds up under scrutiny. And we know that diverse workplaces aren't just better to work, places to work, they work better. Companies that have diverse workforces are make more money. People are happiest, especially in creative industries. And obviously, age is a criterion for diversity. So if you're in a workplace setting, or for that matter, a social setting, and everyone is the same age, ask how come, right? I mean, I have learned to notice if everyone on the panel is a man. There's even a manel, I've heard it called. Right? Or if everyone in the room is white. Well, train yourself to notice if everyone in the room is the same age too, and ask, gee, how come? Right? Because I'm trying to think, maybe never is a bad word, but hardly ever a good reason. So we're learning so much more about the effects of ageism on our health. There's institutionalized ageism, which it happens when doctors are less receptive to the medical concerns of older people, when they talk to the younger person who's with the older patient instead of to that person, and on and on. And here again, zoom out. Why should we accept a lesser standard of treatment for older people, right? It's not okay. Internalized ageism matters too a lot. A growing body of fascinating research shows that attitudes towards aging have an actual measurable effect on how our minds and bodies function. And most of the work here has been done by Becca Levy here at Yale, and she shows that people, she calls it, and the media calls it, have a more positive attitude towards aging, live longer, 7.5 years longer on average, walk faster, heal quicker. I say a more realistic attitude towards aging, a fact rather than fear-based attitude. This is why the World Health Organization, not the World Old People Organization, launched a global campaign to combat ageism 2 years ago, because we're all living longer, right, everywhere in the world, and the World Health Organization wants to keep people healthy as long as possible, and they realized that the biggest obstacle was ageism, right, how we think, feel, and act about age and aging. Tragically, no evidence that Sudoku or brain training or those New York Times word games that probably most of us are addicted to, confer any real protection against cognitive decline, but study after study shows that attitudes towards aging matter a lot. People who associate old age, later life with growth and purpose are less likely to develop Alzheimer's, wait for it, even if they have the gene that predisposes them to the disease, right? I mean, who knows this, right? And my blog, thischeerrocks.com, /blog. All this stuff is in there. I also have a book, but it's more up to date on the blog, and you can find all of these, the research for all of these, the footnotes, very easily. And Becca's latest research finding is remarkable. What she calls positive age beliefs don't just help prevent mild cognitive decline, which some people say isn't even a medical condition. I don't have a firm opinion on that, amazingly. I have a lot of opinions. But they don't just help prevent mild cognitive decline, they can actually reverse it and improve memory. Part of it is what she calls stereotype embodiment theory. If you think you can't remember anything, if you think this whatever failing, physical, cognitive, social, is because of your age, you're less likely to challenge it and try and change it, right? And so the idea is that accurate beliefs about aging help keep us healthy by buffering the stress and prejudice, right? It's all about stress, as usual. And, that is the effect of living in an ageist world. And equating aging with disease and decrepitude and assuming that decline is inevitable makes us more vulnerable to exactly what we fear. No surprise to any of you either that ageism disproportionately affects women. Because aging is gendered, we experience the intersection of ageism and sexism. And double standard at work here, shocker. The idea that aging enhances men up to a point. It bites them too, and devalues women. And we women reinforce this double standard when we compete to stay young, which is impossible and expensive and divides us and sets us up against each other. And the effects add up over time and are, as ever, compounded by race and by class, which is why everywhere in the world, the poorest of the poor, sickest of the sick are old women of color. Ageism segregates us. Discrimination of any sort sanctions segregation and isolation. And those are the biggest threats to a good old age. Feeling alienated from older people and apprehensive at being like us is not natural. I've learned to watch out for that word. It is not inevitable. And ageism impoverishes us all because it cuts us off from most of humanity. Think about it, right? Especially in the US, where very few people have a good friend, someone you would discuss a personal matter with, that's even 10 years younger or older, and 10 years is a tiny smidgen of our lifespan if we're lucky. And when you mix it up with all ages, it enriches us in countless intuitively, strategically obvious ways. I just read a study about metabolic changes that occur in the brain when people mix it up. So, what do? We are living at an extraordinary time in human history. 4, even 5 living generations are becoming commonplace. They always talk about 5 generations in the workplace, like unless you have a toddler who can type, that's not happening. But you are having 5 living generations, which is amazing. And the rules and institutions around us were created when lives were shorter. Right? It's not all ageism. They haven't had time to catch up. And that's why we have this critical window of opportunity to shape a world that supports people of all ages across the whole lifespan. In progressive circles in gerontology, it's called the life course approach. So if we want to take advantage of this, we need to quit the reflexive hand-wringing. Like you say the word aging and everyone gets all sad and starts to, literally wring their hands. So question the ageist assumptions that underlie the hand-wringing and think realistically and imaginatively about how to create the age-diverse, age-mixed world that we all want to live long enough to inhabit. So it's going to take all hands on deck, and needless to say, that means all ages. So a couple of suggestions for ways to do that. Tap into what we know. Growing older isn't just different from what we've been brainwashed to believe, it's way better. It's not that the losses aren't real, but aging brings authenticity and confidence and self-awareness, clearer priorities. It's easier to manage emotions, right? People care, we feel more liberated from what people think about us, which is really liberating, especially for women. Am I right about that? And we want less. I mean, that's why nobody, So someone in the back row is going to take an issue. But nobody actually wants to go back to their youth. I ask this question and everyone's face brightens for a second and then they're like, oh wait, because you don't get to like wipe the board clean and have your 18-year-old cartilage and your 80-year-old brain, right? Because we know, no matter how apprehensive we may be, that our years are what make us us, right? And they are filled with precious and valuable experiences. This shouldn't be such a big ask, but learn to look more generously at each other and ourselves. That's the hard part. Entire industries are built on convincing people that my 71-year-old face and body are hideous, that old equals ugly, especially for women. But a system designed to exploit our insecurities only works if we agree to it. Instead of muttering, what the hell happened at the face in the mirror, and we all do that, and I'm my bad because I opened the talk talking about my wrinkles. I would like to actually banish all talk about what women look like. But as I've just demonstrated, that's a hard rule to follow. But think about some of the things that did happen and how remarkable some of them were. Now, this shouldn't be as huge an ask as it is. It is the work of a lifetime. We have to embark on it together, all genders and all ages together. But none of this stigma is natural and none of it is fixed. And we can insist on being seen and valued as our full, rich, lumpy, complicated selves and taking that out into the world. Another biggie. In India, most people live with their families as they age, right? And there is no shame in asking for help of all kinds, including with toileting. Right? Imagine that. That's like a socially constructed idea. Here we don't even want to, think about that. The terms and power dynamics are going to shift, right? And not all the changes are welcome, of course. And the goal is to give and to receive with grace. I love this quote by a Dutch gerontologist named Jan Bars. Autonomy requires collaborators. And I know we're going to be hearing more about that from Donna, right? No one is independent. Ever. I would like to take the word independent out of the whole discourse around aging. We are interdependent from life to death, right? If you break your foot, if you have a baby, if you get sick, if you all those things, we all need help lifelong, and it becomes important to think as we grow older and need help of certain kinds, who's going to help us, right? If we want to have the lives that we want to age with dignity, then think about who your co-conspirators are going to be, right? And of course, you are helping others at the same time. So acknowledge the need for helping hands and reach for them gratefully and without shame from birth to death. The most important component of a good old age, not health, which is what I would have guessed heading in, not wealth, but having a solid social network. So that is why it's really important to make friends of all ages. Think of something you like to do and find a mixed age group to do it with. Doesn't matter what that thing is. If you go to a social thing or a work thing, sit next to someone who is not the same age as you. Break that habit of heading for people your own age when you come in the room. We all do it. No judgment. You may or may not like that person, but you won't not like them because there's an age gap, right? It's never about age. And when we do mix it up, of course, it's great for older people for lots of reasons, and it's really good for younger people too, because younger people to mix it up, because we need to be reminded, I think, of how hard it is to be young, right? No one wants to go back to it. And when younger people are mixing it up with older people, it helps them see how dumb it is, how much of our time we squander when we are young, worrying about getting old. Join forces. I'm an activist. Dismantling ageism is going to take nothing less than the mass movement that catalyzed a massive change in voice and visibility for women around the world in the 20th century. We've made real progress there, as well as on civil rights and rights for queer and trans people. And God knows we've gotten a lot of pushback, but that in itself tells you something. It tells you we're getting somewhere, because no one gives up power without a struggle. A global movement to raise awareness of ageism and how to end it is underway. What's my evidence? I have evidence for every single thing that comes out of my mouth, or I admit that I don't. So I co-created the Old School Anti-Ageism Clearinghouse, which is about to get a beautiful rebrand as just plain old school, a hub for coming together to educate ourselves about ageism and what we can do about it. We're having a convening in Montreal in August if any of y'all want to come. It's going to be really cool. Talk to me after. Hundreds of all those things, ways to share them. And when we launched in 2018, we didn't even have a campaign section. And now there are over 30 campaigns around the world. So if you want to learn about the World Health Organization campaign, for example, it's in here. If you want to find Becca Levy's books, they're in here. It's searchable, obviously. So, and if you want to learn anything aspect about ageism, you can find it one-stop shopping, and everything is free except the books. We can't get rid of ageism without addressing ableism and racism and sexism and homophobia and all the rest, because these are systems of oppression that intersect and inform and compound each other. You all, I bet most of you know the word intersectionality. That's coined by a legal scholar named Kimberly Crenshaw to show how these things all reinforce each other. But I will say that if that feels overwhelming, here's another way to think about it. That when we speak up against any form of bias, we chip away at the fear and ignorance that underlie them all, right? Because they all intersect. So if you are working on being less racist, you are making in the process life better for older people of color and so on. It is the opposite of zero sum. Age equity requires gender equity because aging is harder for women. It requires disability equity because fears of incapacity feed stigma and age shame. I haven't even talked about the intersection of ageism and ableism, right? Which is much of what we fear about aging is about how our minds and bodies might change. And that's not actually about age, because we age in different ways. It's about ability and capacity. And age equity requires racial equity because racism denies multitudes the chance to age at all. In the words of poet and activist Audre Lorde, there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we don't lead single issue lives. Can't go wrong quoting Audre Lorde. Aging is the one universal human experience, and ageism is the one form of bias that every human being encounters. And when we make the world a better place to grow old in, we make it a better place in which to be from somewhere else, to have a disability, to be female, to be queer, to be all the things that deviate from what, from a society that says you have to be young, thin, white, blonde, and preferably male. And when we show up at all ages for whatever cause we believe in, save the whales, save the clinic, doesn't matter, right? We make it a better, we dismantle ageism in the process just by showing up at all ages. Making a significantly older or younger friend is in itself an anti-ageist act. And by doing that, we dismantle ageism organically just by doing that. You can't start too small. You can't start too late. Every little change in your own attitude, your own thinking ripples out in the world and changes it. Longevity is here to stay. A movement to end ageism is underway. I'm in it, and I hope you will join me. Thanks for listening. Oh, and Donna.
Ashton, thank you so much. I love to listen to you talk. I love to read what you write.
Do I look like a movie director?
I know. Don't fall down. That would be a good thing. Obviously, I've been a gerontologist for more than 30 years. So when your book came out, I said, this is obviously a must read. And I read it. And it is, it becomes more relevant every year, I feel like. It's just a wealth of information, and hearing you talk about these issues, there's so many things I'd like to follow up on. So for now, I would say you have gotten to speak to so many folks around the country, around the world. You've gotten to see some examples, certainly on the Clearinghouse, Old School Clearinghouse. You have lots of examples. What do you see as sort of some good news, right? What are things where is it working well? And that could be where geographically, it could be where issue oriented. What's going well in terms of anti-ageism?
Well, all change begins with awareness. And, Buddha said that, or Gandhi said that, not me. But most bias is unconscious, and we can't challenge something we're not aware of. And I know from all sorts of sources starting, I mean, I have a Google prompt set to ageism. I get a lot more prompts than I used to. The whole somewhat tiresome discourse around the age of presidential candidates has somewhat ironically done a tremendous amount to raise awareness of ageism. Most of the comments, whether they come from the right or the left end of the spectrum, say, I know this is ageist, but. So I see, and I do see in a very measurable index in the growth of the clearinghouse. We thought it would be this little spreadsheet that we'd have to update every 6 months. And it contains almost 400 resources now, and we're picky about what we put on there. So simply the growth in awareness is massive, and that is, that is the most important single indicator that change is underway.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I really, would appreciate your leading voice and bringing that message out there. And it's, ever more relevant really every year as older people are growing. We are in an unprecedented time in terms of demographic growth. The folks 85 and older are the largest growing segment of our country's population.
Globally.
Globally, right? Which is astounding. And I feel like
a triumph of public health.
Say it again.
A triumph of public health.
For sure. And it's a good news, bad news thing. So for sure it's good news. And then it's, what do we do now? How do we focus?
Yeah, they're real challenges.
I know. That's why one of the reasons it's so hard, it feels like we really are figuring this out. It's the first generation that's lived as long as they do on a large scale. So a lot of good news. Awareness is up. People doing some creative things, trying models around the country, which is wonderful to raise just individual and organizational awareness about ageism. What's been harder? Where is it not working? Are there persistent messages, or what's a hard sell about anti-ageism?
Well, ageism is profoundly entrenched in the culture. Right? Just like racism and white supremacy. Culture change is slow and hard, and and unlearning is hard, especially when it comes to values. Mm-hmm. So, so the whole damn thing is hard. But I will say that if you start by looking at your own attitudes towards age and aging, just think about how you use the words old and young, right? We say, I don't feel old. What that really means is I don't feel invisible. I don't feel useless. I don't feel incompetent. Well, we can feel all those things at any age. I felt more that way when I was 13 than I ever did, in my later life. If you can do that, and that is really the most uncomfortable part, because no one wants to admit that they're biased, right? And it's uncomfortable. The good news is that it is paired instantly, automatically, it's like letting a genie out of a bottle. When you see it in yourself, then it's like a mist sort of clearing or something. Then you can see it in the world around you. You start to see it in conversations, in birthday cards, on TV, etc. And that means then, that it is a social and economic issue that we can come together and do something about. That's what consciousness raising is. So I see the awareness of consciousness raising all over the place with all this evidence. And, who knows where the tipping points are? There are always a lot of them. But I do see, real change. I'm extremely optimistic about this work, and it starts in each of us.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I'm the same actually. We always quote Maya Angelou on this when she says, "When you know better, you do better." Ah. And so it is all about awareness raising, and being here today will take you a distance. Anytime you open your mind to new concepts like that, you can see it differently, and then that gives you the option or the choice to try to approach it differently, which is a good thing. So at the conversational level, when you run into folks who say something ageist and they largely don't even realize it, right? Yep. People are trying to give you a compliment and they say, oh, you're whatever age, I would never believe that. You don't look it, that kind of thing. What do you do about that when you run into it?
well, I used to bite their heads off. But I have gotten a little bit better at meeting people where they are, because change is slow and it's hard and it's awkward. And I do a monthly meetup with a wonderful woman. We call it the Discomfort Club, and we talk about stuff that's uncomfortable to talk about and the mistakes we made getting there. And people think there's a right way, especially if your job is involved, which is understandable. You don't want to lose your job. You don't want to piss off your boss. You don't want to get in trouble from HR. But really, the only thing we can do wrong is to do nothing, is to not do anything. And one of the hardest and most important and bravest things to do is to say something. And I think we learned, I don't know, I don't think I knew the word microaggression before learning a lot about anti-racist, being an ally to people with disabilities, to people of color, especially in the workplace, where if you witness something, someone saying something that is biased, that is not appropriate, that is not okay, that you say something about it, or you support the person it's happening to. And a really good all-purpose response is, what do you mean by that? And not in a gotcha kind of way. That's the hard part. But what do you mean? Or tell me more. And the only snappy answer I've come up with in all these years is when someone says, you look good for your age, you say, you look good for your age too. And then they're like, what? And then you just they have no idea. And an answer to how old are you? But no one asked that, which is sort of too bad because it means we're still afraid to. But if you say what year you were born in, that's kind of nice because no one can do the math. But it's like, I was born in 1952. That's a long time ago. And that is a long time ago. I've seen and done a lot of things. And that's really what you want. Age is real, right? There's nothing wrong with mentioning age. Biden and Trump are old. It's not a dirty word. We should feel like it's fine to name it alongside, where we live and whether we have dogs or whatever. But what I want is a world where age is not hidden away or fetishized, where it is devoid of value, where it's not better to be old or better to be young.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. The way I normally say that is, knowing someone's chronological age is one of the least predictive things you can know about them.
The older they are,
the
less the number says, right? Every newborn is unique, but 20-year-olds have way more in common, physically, developmentally, socially, than 40-year-olds, and so on out. So literally, the older the person. I would like medical charts. Your doctors need to know your age. It's an incredibly important piece of what therapies and treatments might be right for you, but it's not in no way predictive. I'd like that to be on page 2 of medical charts, page 2 of dating sites. It can be the first question you ask, the first thing you click on. But sit for a minute with, just the person and your impression of them, because the minute, no judgment, the minute we have a number, all these assumptions click into place.
Yeah. And it's not the criteria to make a decision. It's easy. It's an easy one to pick because you do know someone's age, but that's not the decision, the criteria to say, should you get this medical procedure or not? Should you be retested as a driver in your state? It's an easy target, but it's not necessarily meaningful.
That's so very
Again, just thank you for the ideas, the inspiration, the language in some cases. Thank you all for being here. If you have time for the workshop.